Hi, everyone. My name is Megs Reynolds, and I am the Executive Director for the Do MoreAgriculture Foundation. Do More Ag is the national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture. And I'm here today with Allan Kehler, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Megs, thank you. Yes, my name is Allan. I am based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I'm a passionate mental health advocate who has the lived experience, and the short and sweet is I am simply very grateful to still be vertical to carry this message.
And we are very grateful that you have joined us today to talk about addiction. So we're going to jump right in. When did you realize that you were struggling with addiction? And we are very grateful that you have joined us today to talk about addiction. So we're going to jump right in. When did you realize that you were struggling with addiction?
Long, but I guess at a deeper level, I picked up on it as soon as I had my first drink. Like, I grew up in small town Saskatchewan, 4.5 roads, and I wasn't really exposed to alcohol, but I also have this mindset that tell me that I'm not supposed to do it and I will do it. So that doesn't help. And when I was able to have alcohol for the first time, people often say that they feel normal. Normal obviously is just this setting on a washer or a dryer. But for me, really, I drank it and I felt like for the first time, I could feel at peace. I could fit in. And I mean, most people will turn to some kind of substance or behavior in an effort to feel better, to relieve pain. And for me, it was no different. I had a positive experience the first time. And if someone has a positive experience from something, they would probably continue to do it. And because I was able to experience some relief from my pain, I got into that pattern of turning to the bottle frequently. And the shame obviously was there off the hop too, because it's not something that was ever talked about in my small town. I had actually never known anybody who struggled with addiction. I had never known anyone who struggled with mental illness. And knowing what I know now, in grade 8 is where my challenges with mental illness began. I didn't have the tools to talk about my pain. And so, of course, it makes sense to turn to something outside of myself to just numb it, to mask it.
Mm-hmm. And I know from my experience within agriculture and the stories that we've heard, that's a very common story that's used as a coping mechanism. And I'd say in agriculture in some rural areas, alcohol sometimes, because of the stigma surrounding mental health, can be easier to turn to or look to for support or for that self-medication, if you will, than even just talking to a therapist or opening up and realizing that there is something to do with mental health that needs to be addressed. Was there anyone in your life that maybe tuned into what was going on before you did and tried to talk to you about it, but you were still at a place where you were not ready to see that it was an addiction or how you were using alcohol?
100%, 100%. I did not want to hear it. Most people who struggle don't want to hear it. The sad reality with addiction is you make me choose between my addiction or you, addiction wins.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard because it doesn't make any sense, but that's part of the baffling piece of addiction. It started to interfere with relationships, started to interfere with schools. And I was also a compulsive gambler. Like, I lost everything to gambling, from the online to living at the casinos, and I was still functioning. So I was a student. I was actually doing a field placement teaching at a junior high school when I collapsed on the hallway, in the hallway. And at that point, I had actually been given a month to live from a doctor, but like nobody knew that because I had pushed everyone away.
Mm-hmm.
And that was on me. But that is a lonely, lonely place. It was just years of secrecy and years battling that internal war where eventually you realize, wow, like something has got to give. I always said there has to be more to life
Mm-hmm.
than this hell, because that's all it was for me. It was absolute living hell.
And did you realize that during that period you were lying to yourself, or could you tell that, or was it only when you started to kind of be able to understand how you were using alcohol and gambling and start to try to look for help and find help that you were able to look back on that hindsight piece?
Megs, I feel like there is a very distinct difference between acknowledgement and acceptance. And
That's
I
true.
would say that acknowledgement is the mind's understanding of something, and acceptance is the unity of mind and soul, where we're finally really ready to do something about it. And I totally could acknowledge for years that I had a problem, that it was out of control, but to accept it was, I just wasn't there. I was not at the place for a long time that I was willing to surrender. And the proverbial bottoms, there are a lot of them,
Mm.
including when I was given a month to live. But to be honest, that didn't even stop the alcoholism. That helped with the gambling. I was able to get help with that and attend a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, which helped me down that road. But like I was actually speaking at the time. I was a motivational speaker talking about gambling and wellness and recovery while I was an alcoholic.
Oh,
And so you talk about this hypocrisy. And here's another thing. I was this speaks to the hypocrisy and the manipulation that we often do
mhm.
in active addiction. Like I was 3 months sober, Megs, when I was hired to work at an inpatient treatment center. So, I mean, we don't have to dive down that rabbit hole, but I'll tell you this, I basically learned how to get sober by being an addictions counselor. And I was teaching a college course on addictions counseling. I was teaching people how to be a counselor when I was only 3 months sober. Like, I don't recommend that, but I think it speaks to yeah, the lies, the manipulation, the proverbial mask. And now it feels great not to have to live that life, but good God, that was a battle.
Yes, and thank you for pointing out that there is a difference between acknowledgement and acceptance, because I think when we're on the other side, unless you've struggled with addiction yourself, unless you've had someone close to you struggle with addiction, I think it's very hard to see that there's a difference there. I think it's very easy just to say they're the same thing, right? So if you can acknowledge that something is going on, why can't you start dealing with it, right? Why are you making, choosing that addiction over your farm or your family or the connections in your life and your job? And so I think that was important to cover. Thank you for that.
Well, for sure. And I think with the acknowledgement, then you have to talk about being vulnerable, especially as men. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to reach out for help. There's countless barriers. And then you compound that with shame and the stigma,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's in agriculture or society in general. Like, there's so many hurdles to get over. It's how we will then be perceived in our community. Will it affect how we are perceived in our place of work? Will people want to do business with us? It goes on and on and on. So there's so many fears. There's an absolute liberation that comes from just saying, listen, this is what I'm going through. This is who I am. That feels good. But to get there, to ask for help, to walk
Mm-hmm.
into some of those support groups, I'm not sure there's words to adequately depict the fear, the shame, all those emotions.
Is there anything, like, to those exact points, is there anything that you would say to somebody that's maybe gotten to the point where, they've acknowledged and they're moving through acceptance, but that's their hang up right now, is that fear about all of those what ifs? Is there anything that you would say to them?
Isolation and withdrawal and silence is simply not the answer. I tried all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we are often our greatest barrier. We fear what's on the other end so much. Like, I worked it up in my head. I thought what was going to happen was that I would be ridiculed, judged, on and on and on. We have a long list. It didn't happen. And in fact, in all of my interviews that I've done with people over the years who have given themselves permission to be vulnerable and reach out for help, it was the same theme. They were actually met with compassion more often than not, especially when it was a person of trust. But more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, was the fact that every single person said, wow, like I feel better. Because if emotions are energy, which they were finally able to be free from that. And they
Right.
no longer had to hide behind that proverbial mask. And for me, one of those turning points with addiction, with gambling, like I shared before, I had lost everything. I was having seizures almost every day. And I remember sitting in my car in a church parking lot in Edmonton because there was a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. And a friend of mine who's in recovery, I never heard about 12 step, but he really took the time to listen. There was no judgment. And he just said, what do you have to lose? And I tell you, Megs, like I cried so hard because I was so afraid to open up that door and walk in that building, because then I knew that it was real.
Right.
And then I would have to look at it, right here. And what happened is, when I was able to get into that room, I started to hear my story through their story. And it was this idea of me too, connection. We know that addiction is about connection. But I started to connect to other people's lived experiences. I then didn't feel so alone and isolated, because often, especially in the rural communities, we swear we're the only ones. And no, and that right there is the power of the story and the power of having these conversations, because this is everywhere. We shatter the stigma by talking about our lived experiences.
No, I totally agree. And in doing so, we create safe space for someone else to open up, right? Because suddenly they're not feeling like they're alone in what they're going through and what they're experiencing. How has your life changed since you got support for your addiction?
That's hard to put into words. That's black versus white. My life in Edmonton was really rough. So I was 3 months sober when I had actually made the transition. I moved from Edmonton to Saskatoon, and I moved in with who's now my wife, Tanya, and her 2 boys. And I threw my last cigarette in Lloydminster. And that was like the new beginnings, because I was fortunate to have someone in my life who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And I was fortunate to have someone who had the tough love approach. Sometimes with addiction, we need that. I needed that, because I tell you, if you gave me an out, I would have taken it, because sobriety is so damn hard. It was so hard for me to feel, because I had spent so many years numbing and suppressing. And I think right there, if we were to define addiction, for me, it's that simple. It's a way to live outside of self so that we do not have to be with self. And I had to learn how to, I don't know, in addiction, I would say I was frozen, and I would say to heal is to thaw. And I had to learn how to feel, how to thaw, how to cut ties with so many people who are unhealthy. And so how is it different? Like, I mean, in every way, from the people that I surround myself with, actually having integrity, honesty, living by my values. I mean, it could go on and on and on. It's been hard. It's been incredibly hard. And also what's been interesting is how one can shift from addiction to addiction. And often in the field, we call it cross addiction. So for me, I can look back and, it was the gambling, the alcohol, the self-harm. And then when I was able to kick that stuff, it ended up turning into coins. Like, what? Like, I was addicted to coin collecting. I spent hours online researching all that. Then it was garage sales. Hey, Megs, who needs 52 teacups and saucers? Who I bought hundreds of earrings. What? But it was just a way to busy myself to not go within, right? So I can look back and I mean, we're 13 years into this sobriety thing, and I still very much have days that are very hard. The difference is this: I play the tape forward. I can put myself at that proverbial fork in the road, and I know full well that if I go down that road again, I lose everything. And I also have a partner, Tanya, who's made that clear. Like, you make that choice, this is all gone. And that honestly is a saving grace, because for my recovery, that works.
No, that's very good. And I think what has worked for you may not necessarily work for everybody too, right? Like, we're all different in our experiences and what we need. And I think that that's probably something that anyone watching or listening should keep in mind too. I know some of the things that I've gone through, how I've chosen to deal with them in a healthy way may not be the same way that somebody else would choose to deal with them also in a healthy way. And it's important to understand that, but learn from each other and to be open to sharing.
100%. I think those are the 2 most important things right there, Megs. It's the respect that what works for me won't work for someone else, and the importance of an open mind, because there are things that I never thought would be beneficial that have absolutely been game changers. even from a spirituality component, with culture, learning First Nations culture, that has been absolutely essential. Reiki, never knew what the hell that was, this movement of energy. What? But yes, open mind has been essential.
You've touched on that there, it's still challenging and there's the day to day. What can you get into what pieces for you would be most like, are there, I don't know if trigger is the right word, but are there things that would make that day harder, or pieces that when you're looking at that fork in the road might take you to be looking at it that day? Like what to you has been kind of those harder pieces that keep coming up?
Yeah. There was a lot of trauma in my childhood too, things that I never really put together until I was able to leave the self-destruction behind. So, and that's a whole interesting thing too, how that can surface. And that's a hard thing to talk about, but I started to recall being sexually abused throughout my childhood, which really gave me the insight as to the why. Like, why did I hate myself so bad? Why did I like smoking at an early age? Because I was trying to kill something inside. It was the same thing with alcohol. I was trying to drown out the demons, but then of course they learn how to swim. And where I'm going with this is, even with trauma, like it's there's good days and there's bad days. So for me, when some of that pain surfaces, it's just hard. And other times, to your point, it is triggers. I have very good boundaries. Some people, if we're talking about alcohol, they have no problem going to a pub or a restaurant. I have a hard time. I have a hard time going to hockey games. I have a hard time going anywhere public where there's alcohol. And some people, again, they never crave alcohol or whatever their substance or behavior is. I do. And so for me, uh, it just is what it is. But I play the tape forward. I've learned the importance of putting a voice to my feelings. I no longer bottle it up. I can talk to my supports. I can go to a meeting if I needed to. I trust that this will pass, because initially I didn't know how long these feelings would last, because especially early on, it's hard. It is so overwhelming. And that you could take this pain away. But the problem, of course, is it's temporary, and then it causes long-term problems.
Yeah, thank you. What would you say to someone who maybe has identified that someone close to them, and it could be in their family, is starting to struggle with alcohol abuse or addiction? Do you have any recommendations for how someone should go about having, and I know it's up to ultimately that person to get to the point where they can, like we've already talked about, acknowledge and accept, but is there any guidance that you would give to people out there that are feeling like they should be trying to have a conversation or trying to support somebody?
Yeah, I think that sometimes, unfortunately, we still come at this with some judgment. And I think that compassion is absolutely key. The approach, I don't know what it is, like 7% of the way that we communicate is verbal, right? 93% is through the mannerisms, blah, blah, blah. But I knew when people approached me who were truly genuine about it and who loved me. And even though I often reacted in an aggressive manner or not a kind way, I heard. And I think that we always hear, and we all deserve and are worthy of love. And I think that it's as simple as continuously checking in and saying, I just want to let you know I'm concerned. Just want to let you know that if you ever need an ear, I'm happy to listen. If you ever are interested in accessing some of the supports, I'm happy to assist you. But then the problem, and I know that you're going to be interviewing someone in the supportive role, which is huge, but it's the boundaries. How do you not lose yourself in their journey? That's the hard part, because you said it, Megs. Like you cannot save someone who will not be an active participant in their own rescue.
And that is such a hard thing as someone on the other side to just try to, that's a very challenging piece. Is there something that we could all do, like society as a whole, to, because right now we have a culture with alcohol specifically where it's very much, it's the why don't you want to drink? versus the like, what would you like to drink, right? We just always assume somebody wants an alcoholic drink. And with women, it's like, well, are you pregnant? Like something has to be going on, right? Like, why aren't you drinking? And for me, I feel we've created this culture where if you've had a hard day, like have a drink. Like the teachers must have had a hard year this year. Let's buy them all alcohol for their yearly or their Christmas present, right? So do you think there's like, anything that we can do to start shifting that narrative around like how we as society just even think about and talk about alcohol?
Yeah, well said. I think information is power. I think that everything starts with awareness, and everything that you just alluded to is the awareness piece. If we can all just agree that, wow, somehow we've arrived at this place where alcohol is so prevalent in our society, and why is it that we feel guilty if we say no to it? The reality is alcohol is a drug, right?
Yeah.
Like it affects the way that we think, how we behave. It is the only drug where if we say no, we have to rationalize that. Like what, how if you think about that, that makes no sense. We glamorize alcohol. And yet if somebody gets charged with an impaired, or if they injure somebody, we are very quick to point our finger, when I can't even tell you how many times I got behind the wheel, sadly, and thank God I never harmed someone, but we don't like to point the finger at ourselves. And I think that we just need to have these open, honest conversations, because the biggest thing for me is we have 4 boys, and I think that children are always watching us. And
Yeah.
if we glamorize this stuff, if we abuse it, like you go to a sporting event, and this happened to me not too long ago, where the guy on the camera had a cup of beer in his hand, and then he realized he was on the big screen. So what does he do? He stands up and everyone says, what? Chug, chug, chug. Ah, hey, the people have asked. So he downs it. What does any kid who's present learn from that? And I think in summary, it's just the awareness piece.
Yeah. No, I like that. One of the things that really surprised me, I grew up in Calgary, and moving to rural Saskatchewan to a farm was just the prevalence of alcohol, but also how common and accepting everyone was, because it's dirt roads, it's back roads, of drinking well over what you should be drinking and then driving home. And it's never a message, or rarely a message of, can I have your keys? Like you can stay the night. It's just make sure you take the back roads. And like there's, for me, I know it's in, cultural society as a whole, but for me in agriculture, there's so much that we need to shift when it comes to just alcohol and rural communities, to, start to all together work, hopefully, to try to, put mental health first, and take away some of the society's acceptance over these pieces.
Agreed. Yeah, you say it well. I grew up the same way that you did. It's culturally acceptable. And sadly, we would lose people to drinking driving accidents. We would celebrate by drinking.
Yeah.
And there's something seriously wrong, but to look at it is hard, because then we often have to look at our own behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a lot harder to do.
Yes.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about so far that you wish other people knew about addiction?
Oh my gosh. I could talk for 3 days. I feel as though the short and sweet is this: when it comes to addiction, you simply have an individual who's in pain. They lack the tools to manage pain, and so they grab at straws. It is very logical to want to leave pain behind in exchange for pleasure, correct?
Yes.
It's really that simple. And to your point, like you have all these different variables happening. It's socially acceptable, it's readily available, many different things are cheap, even whether it's pornography or work, or like there's so many external distractions, that what I have learned is it is absolutely essential to learn how to have a relationship with yourself. And sadly, wow, I'm not sure. I was doing an event in Alberta last week, and I actually said to the audience, you tell me what percentage of people do you think would actually have a relationship with themselves? We came up with the number of 5. What do you think? 5%.
I would still say that might be high.
Isn't that sad though?
Yeah.
Because we come into this world with our own journey, and often you ask very basic questions. Name something that you like, you love, you hate, you fear. How do you answer this question? I am. How do you finish that? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The what is that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but where I'm going with that is, if you have a relationship with self, if you're comfortable with self, there is then no reason to look outside of self for something that already exists within.
Mm-hmm. I think too, like bringing the mental health awareness and education to it can help, because I know like once I've started on my own journey and working with a counselor, and little things that would suddenly set me off or make me feel a sudden way, suddenly it was like, why am I like, you're able to get to a place where you can hit pause and kind of think, why am I feeling this right now, and what is actually causing that, like what is actually bothering me, because it maybe isn't the fact that one of my kids just spilt milk, or that we got shut down for a breakdown on the farm, right? There's usually another piece of that puzzle, and being able to hit pause and identify that, and coming through the self-understanding of who you are and all of those pieces, I think is so important.
I agree with you, Megs.
Would you, is there anything that if you could go back in time to right at the beginning, or when things were really, really bad, and say to yourself, what would that be? Or do you feel that you would have been able to go back to that time? And would there have been anything that you could say to yourself that would have helped in that moment?
Yeah, the reality for me is no, because I have the most twisted sense of gratitude for all the things that I have gone through, because it has brought me to this place where there are so many teachings that come from being in pain, aren't there? And it's like, not so much why is this happening to me, but um changing that mindset to what can I learn from these experiences. And I never I I had to get to that place on my own, and it's sad that that's true for so many of us. Like, it doesn't matter what other people say to us, often we just have to get to that place where I want something different, and therefore I must do something different.
Mhm.
um it would have been easier, of course, if I could have got myself support earlier, but then all the other dots wouldn't have lined up how they did. So yeah, I'm I'm very, very grateful, because the reality is I spent most of my life trying to harm or kill myself. And uh, th- there just is no logical reason why I should still be alive, other than I really feel like I'm just here to carry a message. And I am beyond grateful to be in this position.
We're very grateful to have you with us today and to have you sharing. Is there
So
anything
thank you.
you would add that we haven't touched on for anyone who's, stumbled across this on the internet and this is really their first introduction to addiction?
Well, that would mean that they've already gotten like 20 minutes into the interview or something, which is pretty damn good. Ah, I think for me, it's learning how to use my voice. That's been everything. I mean, I'm the guy who has put on so many pharmaceutical pills, and actually, I think I was on 12 pharmaceutical pills in 6 years. Like that's a lot. And the greatest medicine for me has simply been using my voice, putting a voice to my pain. And when I don't trust people, because I don't, and
Mm.
I'm working on that, I can tell a piece of paper and I rip it up. But what has helped me the most is learning that the act of feeling is what leads to healing. And for a man, that's been hard, because I didn't grow up with a lot of those scripts, as many of us haven't. But really, giving myself permission to feel and then putting a voice to my feelings has been the catalyst for change.
And I think that's something that we can all, no matter who's stumbled upon this video, who's watching it, no matter what is going on in their life, I think that's something that we all can take away, that,
Yeah.
putting a voice to our feelings, and that can apply to our day-to-day lives and everything that we are all going through. Allan, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been incredible. What you shared, is I think will connect with so many people and I think change lives. And I really appreciate your time with us today.
Beautiful. Right back at you. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you as well. Thanks everyone for watching. Please check out our website, www.domore.ag, for resources for mental health, including crisis lines, and check out our YouTube page for more videos like this.